Who was Saint Bartholomew? When this was proposed to the Adult Formation Committee, I said, well, I'll build a big class, maybe 30 seconds. I forgot that when Christians don't have, you came to help. When Christians don't have facts to go on, we make them up. For 2,000 years, we've been busy inventing legends about Saint Bart. And boy, some of them are pretty weird. Okay. For example, how many of you knew that Bart has a flower dedicated to him? And what's the flower?
Sunflower.
And we have some right out front for some reason.
Indigenous to where he carried the gospel.
What?
It's indigenous to the area where he is said to have carried the gospel.
Well, he was said to have carried it all over the place. Which place are you thinking of?
Asia Minor, particularly modern day Armenia.
Are you serious? Sunflowers?
Yeah.
You can find anything you want on the internet. Sometimes it's even accurate. I was trying to find out when it became his flower. When did that legend get started? And one site said it was a Catholic legend from the Middle Ages. And I checked another site and said, nah, it couldn't be because Europeans didn't even know about sunflowers until Pizarro went to Peru and brought them back in the 16th century. And you're on another site. Well, okay. That's just one of our questions, of course. Another one is why would that be his flower? Any ideas? The sunflower has symbolized all kinds of things to many people. You all remember William Blake's poem from Songs of Experience, 1794? Ah, sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime where the traveler's journey is done. Blake sees it as something like what Freud would call the death wish, the life force, the death wish. The main idea I've run into with Bart is maybe it symbolizes constancy, devotion, because it's, what's the word, heliotrope, it follows the sun very, very loyally. But we don't know. Here again. And of course, you know that St. Bart has his own day, right? Today. No, it isn't.
Today.
It was yesterday.
Yeah.
But this is the closest Sunday we can get to it.
This is the observed day.
In our parish.
In our parish.
In our parish. Actually, we have more question marks because St. Bart's Day is celebrated at different times of the year depending on which church you belong to. All right? And it's also, whenever it's celebrated, the traditional occasion for markets and fairs, you know, like Smithfield in London. Ben Jonson in 1614 wrote a play called Bartholomew's Fair. It's still celebrated in, where is it? Somerset. And has been ever since, at least in 86. So we used to do the most important festival in Atlanta each year. The Old English Festival usually coincided with St. Bartholomew's Day, didn't it? One time it was in the spring.
It was more
Mostly
September.
October, 1st of October.
October?
Oh, yeah.
September, yeah.
Well, fall anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were more or less piggybacking on the tradition. All right. Okay. We also have questions about the dude's name. This is what it looks like in Greek, but of course we didn't get it from Greek. We got it from Hebrew and Aramaic. Bar, as you know, means son, like bar mitzvah. Son of something.
Ptolemaeus.
And we're not sure if it means son of a plowman or son of the furrows, the thing that a plowman does. And then there are some Christians who get all a tizzy at the thought that he may have had royal blood coursing through his veins. Why? Because way back in 2 Samuel, there's a king whose daughter became one of the many wives of David and was the mother of Absalom, he of the long hair and the rebellion. But again, that was so far back, and there's lots of people with names sort of like Tolman. Who knows? You know. And we don't even know for sure what he looked like. Well, I lied. We know exactly what he looked like because we have a color portrait from his high school yearbook. The clearest description of what he looked like we don't have until the 13th century. You've heard of the Golden Legend? Oh, I have an ancient copy at home and written in primitive English. The Golden Legend came out about 1260 and was added to over centuries. It was compiled by a guy named we usually call Verigine. His name was really apparently Jacopo di Fazio. He should have been mayor of New York City. But the Golden Legend, this collection of saints' lives or hagiographies, it tells us his hair is black and curly, his skin white, his eyes large, his nose even and straight, kind of Aryan. His beard thick and with few gray hairs, he is of medium stature. That's very detailed. We're also told, can you see?
Oh, I'm fine.
We're also told that he wore the same outfit for 26 years, and it never wore out. Now, saints are always associated with miracles, of course. Here's our first one. We'll get to some others, you know. Especially the thing about the shoes, because right then he walked everywhere, as we'll find. Okay? All right. So who was he? Well, we don't know a lot from Scripture. He is named in all three of the synoptic lists, and the fourth time when Luke says he was present for the ascension, writing in Acts. And each time he's mentioned after Philip, which has given rise to the legend that there was some association between them. How many of you have run into the idea that he was also known as Nathaniel? Okay, several of you. All right. Where did that come from? Well, very simple. In the Synoptic Gospels, there's this disciple among the 12 named Bartholomew. There is no Bartholomew in the Gospel of John. But there is a Nathaniel, who ain't to be found in the Synoptics. But in John, Nathaniel does seem to be associated, again, with Philip. You know, remember that wonderful story? Philip goes up to Nathaniel and says, "We found the Messiah. It's Jesus of Nazareth." And the resident smartass in the house, Nathaniel says, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" And Philip, who was a good evangelist, says, "Come and see." So he takes Nathanael to meet Jesus, and Jesus looks at him and says, "Behold, an Israelite in whom is no guile." And Nathanael, who seems to have had a bit of an ego, says, "How did you know me?" And Jesus says, "I knew you when you were sitting under the fig tree." And Nathanael, who also liked to leap to conclusions, says, "Not only are you the Messiah, you're the Son of God and the King of Israel." And becomes one of the 12 disciples. I have been unsuccessful the last month in finding any modern scholar who thinks that the story of equating the two guys has credibility. And it's a great story. The theory is that his name was really Nathaniel Bartholomew. First name, last name. Bart, son of Nate. But apparently not, or I can't find any scholars that buy it. Instead, there's an interesting story here. Quick digression. I read that in the early manuscripts of the Gospels, the names in the list of the 12 disciples are all over the place. Some of that has survived. We have Nathaniel, we have Bart, we have Mark and Luke call the guy Levi. Matthew calls him Matthew. We assume it's the same guy, maybe not. Scholars say that what happened was as time passed and the church began to firm up its traditions and decided what the party line was going to be about the 12, scribes began to intentionally modify what they were copying to impose that civility on the list. The important thing I think this is a consensus about it. The important thing is not the names of the 12 innermost disciples. You remember one point Luke sends out 70. Jesus had a lot of disciples, including women. But the inner 12 are the ones we talk about all the time. And it has to do with SAT word of the day, gematria. This morning over coffee, I said, I wondered, I looked it up, how to pronounce this word. I found gematria, I found gematria, apparently it's one of those words you can't mispronounce. I like that. But gematria simply is a fancy word that means number symbolism. Words in the ancient world were not scientific data, as they are for us. They were metaphors. They were symbols. And Jesus was symbolically reconstituting the house of Israel. Okay? That's why in Matthew, 19 or 20, he says to his disciples, the inner 12, he says, you will sit on 12 thrones in the kingdom, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And it's why in the book of Acts, after Judas takes himself out of the scene, the disciples get together and throw dice or draw lots or something. They pick Matthias because Judas was of our number. That's the important thing about the 12. We really don't know much about any of the others, even Peter. Everybody knows that Peter went to Rome and was crucified upside down because he said he didn't deserve to die like his master, and became Pope of Rome according to Catholic neighbors. And modern scholars are dubious that he ever made it to Rome. If you wonder about that, shoot me an email and I'll put you onto a recent article by a scholar from Boston University who, in just a couple of pages, summarizes the case against thinking that. Very interesting stuff. Legends everywhere. Okay. If he was a disciple, of course he had to become a missionary. Why? Because we all know the Great Commission. How's it go? Go ye therefore into all the world, teaching all nations whatever I have commanded you, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and lo, I'm with you all the way to the end of the world. I used to have the King James memorized. And the thing is, there's a consensus in modern scholarship that was probably not written by Matthew. It was probably written later and inserted in Matthew. The big clue is, of course, baptism in the Trinity. Yes, Bev?
No, sorry.
The Trinity wasn't around for about 200 years. See? If you look in the book of Acts, for example, baptism was always in the name of Jesus. All right? But because of things like the very influential Great Commission, we have decided that all 12 disciples, whatever their names were, they had to go on to become missionaries. And we have all these legends like Thomas going to India. What? That's a legend? And there are also associated with disciples miracles. If you're a disciple, if you're a saint, you got to do miracles. In fact, am I right? In the Roman Catholic Church, they will not canonize someone unless they can verify 3 miracles. Okay, so I've got room to go. I'll give you just 2 of the many miracles associated with this guy. They come from the island of Lipari. It's that little dot north of Sicily, off the heel of the toe of Italy. There are, you can't see it, but there's a group of 7 tiny volcanic islands right there. Lipari is the largest of them. And Lipari is the site of this beautiful building, a cathedral of Saint Bartholomew. And the story is, in this cathedral, there's a statue of the saint. I'd like to know what it looks like there. There's a statue of Bartholomew that's made out of silver and a little bit of gold. Here's the story. In centuries past, on St. Bartholomew's Day, the villagers of Lipari would take that statue, and the technical word is they would translate it. They would carry it down the hill into the village and all around, and then restore it to the cathedral. On one occasion, they were carrying it, and it suddenly got very heavy, and they had to set it down. and wrestled with it. And they picked it up, started down the hill, and it got even heavier. And they set it down a second time. And they picked it up and started to carry it. I think the third time's a charm in old stories, right? All of a sudden there was this earthquake, and a lot of the walls of the village down the hill collapsed. If it hadn't been for that miracle of the weight changing, a lot of people would have been hurt and maybe killed. I believe it. The second miracle has to do with World War II. The fascist government was looking for funds to spend on bullets or something, and they came up with the idea of confiscating this statue from the cathedral on Lipari and melting it down. But when they assayed it, they discovered that it was base metal. It only had a couple of grams of silver. So they got discouraged, and the fascists said, I'll put it back in the cathedral. A miracle. Or else somebody was a good Christian and lied. Okay. There are other miracles about him, but that's probably enough of those. I said if you were a saint and a disciple, you had to, of course, be a missionary. And the story about this guy is that he went all over the place. I just got a short list. Ethiopia, Mesopotamia, Parthia, Armenia, India. Always with those shoes that for 26 years did not wear out. And he knew all languages, which is a good thing since he walked around so many places. And his voice was like a trumpet, which is a nice thing if you're playing Billy Graham. And it was always cheerful. Angels waited on him. He prayed 100 times every day and 100 times every night. The legend doesn't say if they were short prayers or long ones. One of the stories about Martin Luther, is that we had the Protestant Reformation because he got ticked off that he would do the daily office and all the other monks would be done in a matter of a minute or two. Well, that leads us to the other thing about saints. As you know, if you're a saint, you probably got killed. If you were one of the 12 disciples, you probably came to a bad end. Who was it? Tertullian, 2nd century, said famously that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. You run into that. There's a new book by the prolific Bart Ehrman called The Triumph of Christianity. In one chapter, he does a survey of recent scholarship on martyrdom. Very interesting. Apparently, there were not that many Christians in the early centuries who were martyred. If you're curious about that, shoot me an email and I'll send you the information. Anyway, the story about Bart is that he died how?
Flayed alive.
How many of you say he was flayed alive? A good many of you.
I don't really know.
Here we go
I
again.
have heard.
I have heard. It has been reported. One more time, we don't know. Let's go back to the Golden Legend from 1260 or whenever. There be divers opinions of the manner of his passion. As I said, my translation has older English to it. For the blessed Dorothea saith that he was crucified. Okay, that's one legend. And saith also Bartholomew preached to the men of India and delivered to them the gospel after Matthew in their proper tongue. Matthew was translated into... Okay.
No, but he spoke all those languages. So
He spoke all languages. He probably translated himself.
off the cuff.
After India got its independence from England, they kept English as the official language because they had so many languages and dialects. That was the only thing they had in common, I understand. He died in Alban, a city of Great Armenia, crucified head downward like Peter, okay? That's another legend. St. Theodorus saith that he was flayed, and it is read in many books that he was beheaded only. Well, what do we do with this diversity of opinion? This contrariety may be assoiled, like that word, may be reconciled, in this manner, that he was crucified, taken down ere he died, and for to have greater torment he was then flayed, and at the last beheaded. All the above, E. John Fox, this book, of course, was the second Bible for Protestants, especially in England, parts of America. Fox's Book of Martyrs simply says he was cruelly beaten and then crucified. Doesn't mention flaying at all. Interesting. He even has a symbol, a shield, 3 parallel flaying knives.
One for the Father, one for the Son, and one for the Holy Spirit.
Here, here. I don't know. It took three butchers? I don't know. This one is a photo taken from an Episcopal church in Pennsylvania. Actually, on their website, they call themselves Anglo-Catholic, but they're part of the parish of Pennsylvania, our parish. This is the famous portrayal Michelangelo gave us of Bart with his flayed skin over his arm in his risen body. And I can just say, if the glorified body is going to be that buff, bring it on. I'm ready. This is another example. If you have been to the National Gallery of Art on the Mall in D.C., you have probably, whether you noticed it or not, walked by this. This is the Martyrdom of Saint Bart by de Ribera, 1634. Pete, you're our art history expert. Do you know this painting?
Well, it's inspired by pre-post-mannerist. It has all that, distinct lighting, single source. It's
Chiaroscuro, is that it?
Yeah, chiaroscuro, but also, it postdates Caravaggio by about 2 decades, so it's clearly influenced by his work. You can see the similarities to some of his renderings and work.
Pete gave us a recent class on Caravaggio's religious art. You know, a lot of stuff.
I make it up as I go.
Last time we visited our daughter in D.C. and went to the National Gallery, I looked for this and I wrote down what the placard said. If it won't bore you, I'll give you just a paragraph here. Let me skip down. His piercing eyes, open mouth, and petitioning left hand bespeak an intense communication with the divine. Yet this same hand draws our attention to the knife held in the right hand of his torturer there, symbolically positioned in the shape of a cross. What? The knife in the hands?
Well,
It's there. There are two devices. He has something in both hands,
Both hands.
and they cross.
Oh, I missed the left hand. I forgot that when I was looking at it. Okay. Transfixed by Bartholomew's act of faith, the executioner seems to have stopped short, his furrowed brow and partially illuminated face showing a moment of doubt. Possibility of conversion. The representation of Bart's demise in the National Gallery painting limits the number of participants to the main protagonists, the saint, his executioner, one of the priests who condemned him, and one of the soldiers who captured him. I'm not sure how they figured that out. The cusping along all 4 edges shows that the painting has not been cut down. Ribera intended the composition to be just such a tight, restricted presentation. Cool, huh? Now, Bart was a favorite subject of Renaissance artists because it gave them an opportunity to show their newfound mastery of the human body. Flayed Bart can show every vein, every tendon, that's the idea. It's kind of grisly. Yeah, John?
I like the icon that we have for Saint Bartholomew's.
I guess it's up to date, but it's just a guy, it's just as muscular, all those muscles and ligaments holding his skin. I think that's pretty cool representation.
I forgot all about that. It'd be cool to have translated to the room. Well, check that out later. Here's another example, and this one really shows the anatomical interest they had. How do you pronounce that, Pete? Marco de Grate?
Yeah, they're great.
What would I do without you? In the Duomo, okay. And let's see. Every muscle, vein, and tendon is clearly visible. A clear description of the muscles and structure of the human body. What was it you told me? Da Vinci would pay grave robbers to bring him corpses so he could decide?
Right, he studied, well, he was multiculturalist. He had a lot of different interests, right?
And that's not a legend, that's a
No, that's
fact.
fact. He made a lot of studies of the human
Yeah. Wow. As a result of this version of how he died, he has become the patron saint of tanners, tailors, leather workers, bookbinders, butchers, glove makers, on and on.
guys.
Yeah, okay.
John, was flaying common in the first century?
Anybody know?
Only in Armenia.
Speaking of Armenia, so there are these stories that vary about how he died, and the stories vary about where it took place, even in India. All right, but some Christians in Armenia, actually historical Armenia, around Azerbaijan, they built a monastery on the spot, and that way they could bolster their claim. Look, we even have a building to prove it. And over time, this monastery became the magnet as a depository for relics of Barth. If you're a saint, you gotta leave behind relics. I don't understand that interest, that hobby myself. Seems kind of grisly to me.
It's a moneymaker.
It's a moneymaker. You get a vial of the saint's blood or a block of hair or some fingernail clippings, and you're rolling in money. People will make pilgrimages. Anyway, eventually this monastery fell into ruins, and so the collection of relics was distributed to a bunch of other places. For example, to the monastery, to the Cathedral of Saint Barth in Lipari, Italy, a little island off Sicily you may have heard of. And here's another example. The altar of San Bartholomew Basilica in Benevento, which is about 30 miles north or northeast of Naples. All right? That altar now supposedly contains a bunch of the relics that were once in Armenia at that monastery. And that's not all. You know that old joke, if we could reassemble all the pieces of the true cross, we could float the Spanish Armada? Well, we could reassemble a couple of Barths from all of the stuff that's alleged to be part of them. For example, part of his skull was transferred to the cathedral in Frankfurt, Germany. And this is the one that gets me. An arm, for a long time, was venerated in Canterbury Cathedral. Grotesque. And I really don't understand that hobby, aside from the money-making aspect of it, which I mentioned. Or maybe I do. Decades ago, I was at Road Atlanta for an IMSA race. Carbon fiber was new at the time. Some racer came around, turned 12 onto the front straight, spun and crashed, and a piece of carbon fiber from the bodywork landed at my feet. And damned if I didn't take it home and keep it for years and show it to everybody. The existence of those relics on the island of Lipari that I mentioned is explained by Gregory of Tours by the saint's body having miraculously washed up there on the shores of Lipari. A large piece of his skin and many bones were kept consequently at the cathedral in Lipari. Otto II, Holy Roman Emperor, gave many of the relics in 983 to Rome. Wow. Anyway, it goes on and on. All right. What can you add?